Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with John Goodrich, who he's a horror author. He has also written science fiction and fantasy and some nonfiction books. So, John, for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what it is that you write and what you want to talk about today?
Um, I've skipped around in within genres. I've done a lot of the subgenres of horror. I suspect my next books are going to be horror influenced, but more fantasy or alternate history. So I'm skipping around here and there to look at where I fit best. So uh, I've done all sorts of stuff, and I enjoy it. I mean, my latest book is you could call it Bizarro, and you could also call it Crime with a very unusual protagonist. So I let other people tell me what genre the stuff I write is in, and I think that's best.
And I think you've written a lot about Cthulhu.
Yep, I definitely started. Most of my short stories started out as H.P. Lovecraft influence, and as I've grown as a writer, I've moved away from that. But I think there will always be a little bit of Howard Lovecraft in my writing because he's got that sense of both horror and awe, sort of that sense you get when you're a kid looking up at the stars and wondering what that is, and just staring at how large the universe is. And that's what I loved
Oh,
about H.P. Lovecraft's writing. Yeah.
okay. So, can you tell us a little bit about your last book that you've written?
My last book is called Little Britches. Uh, and it would be sort of a straight up hard-boiled um, crime novel if the protagonist wasn't a 2-year-old hitman who keeps a pair of 45 in his diapers. So once you get past that, it's a fairly straightforward story. Although I divided up into three sections, and he has a main opponent in each section. And when you're writing something even as out there as a 2-year-old hitman who keeps a pair of 45s in his diaper, you kind of have to have a parity with his opponents. You really can't have, a physically fit policeman beat up a 2-year-old, even in fiction. People don't like that. They want to have some sort of I want to say parody again, but a an evenness to a conflict. So I had to come up with opponents that were roughly his size or only a little bit larger. And that was a challenge, and also something that allowed me to go, well, what would make this just weirder?
Would you
And
consider that fantasy?
um, again, I will let other people determine what that is. I never thought of it as fantasy. I thought of it more as bizarro, but also as a crime novel, because it involves the mafia, and it involves FBI agents who are normal sized and regular adults. And the only thing initially that makes it strange is the fact that, the person that they're hunting is a baby.
That is strange, I have to admit. Okay. So, what was the inspiration for Little Britches?
Well, I had just finished my previous novel, and I was kind of looking around for something to write, and I ran across an article that said that, and the headline was, "Every 2 weeks, an American is killed by a baby." I'm sorry, an American is shot by a baby. And most people will go, "Oh my God, that's a horrible tragedy. Uh, who's letting babies near guns?" And my mind went, that is one tough baby. And from there, sort of the idea of having this little kid running around shooting people just like grew in my head. and it didn't take long to sort of get a novel out of that.
Wow. That, yeah, that's an interesting idea.
I've been told for most of my life that I look at things rather differently from most people.
See that? Um, so when you're creating your characters, did you come up with the story first, or did you come up with your characters first?
Um, I come up with with a couple of central characters first, and then sort of develop where it's going. My process is somewhat like Robert Bloch's, if you remember him. He is the guy that wrote Psycho, but when he wrote short stories, he always had his beginning and he definitely had his end, so it would hit like a joke's punchline. And I find that works very well for me if I have a beginning and I have an end and I work towards that end without making all the lines straight. So I need to have a couple of characters at the beginning. How are they going to interact? And then I will fill in other characters depending on their function in the story.
Okay. Now, are you a pantser or an outliner? So did you know what you were going to, I mean, did you have an outline for the story, or did you write on the seat of your pants?
For my first two novels, three novels really, I pantsed them. And then someone suggested, well, you should try outlining. And that was really appealing in the middle of my second book because I got stuck and went, I don't know where I'm going. And that lasted for a couple of days. Um, so now I outline. And sometimes I stick to the outline, sometimes I don't, but it gives me a way to sit down, look at the outline, and go, okay, this is what I'm heading towards. And, of course, you ask yourself, am I still heading towards that or not? Um, Certainly, I will go very far away from my from my outlines.
Okay. So what kind of research went into Little Britches?
I did a bit of research on, what kind of guns people use. I read a bit of mafia crime novels because I need to know, the genre that I'm setting it in, and I needed to know a bit about conspiracy theories and the FBI and how they operate and who would be looking into this sort of thing and what sort of evidence they would need to bring in, you know, certain elements of the FBI because you can't just call the FBI and say, "What's this?" Um, so, and how is the relationship between the FBI and local police, and how do they liaise together? That was kind of looking into that was interesting. So, looking up things I need. How do drug dealers distribute their drugs? Just whatever was needed and whatever was next in the story. I like doing the research because you always find really good details that make the story pop, and I hope that works. I hope that worked in Little Britches.
Did you find the information like, how do people distribute their drugs? How do you find that?
Um, you look up if you live in a larger town, you look up the police reports, or you look at uh, arrest records, or crime novelists who are more tuned into crime than I am, and you sort of pick from them and do it widely so that you're not selecting specifically from one person and so it looks like you're only working off their work.
Okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out Little Britches?
Um, my usual challenge is finding a publisher. At the time, I had um, Crossroad Press, who were like, "Yeah, we like your work, and we're interested." So that was um, that was good because I had written it initially for a Bizarro publisher, and they turned it down. I'm like, well, what am I going to do now? This is really specific, and a lot of publishers are not looking for this sort of thing. And I didn't have a big name, so I couldn't say, hey, you're going to love this because I wrote it. So I had to, so finding the publisher wasn't a terrible problem. Writing the book itself wasn't a terrible problem. Um, Sort of advertising it once it was out tends to be my difficult part because I am not good at self-promotion. I don't know a lot of people who are good at promotion, so I kind of go to I'll go to conventions and sell it that way. And if you can get people to accept, well, what's this book about? It's about a 2-year-old who shoots people. If you can get them to laugh at that, they're probably going to pick up the book because I've intrigued them. There aren't a lot of books about murder babies, and I like to think that mine is one of the better ones.
Okay. Um, so it's difficult to sell the books if you are known for writing a certain type of book, like for a horror author, and you try and sell your book, which is a Bizarro book or a even a regular crime book or whatever, you have to start all over again, don't you, with a different publisher?
Yes, fortunately, I don't have much of a name yet, so I can, lay out my books and go, well, this one is horror, this one's more extreme horror, and this one is bizarro crime. And people will look and decide which one of them they're interested in, and I'll talk it up. Um, so because I'm hand selling most of these, it's not as difficult to reset my reputation and in order to fulfill a reader's expectations.
Mhm. So, do many publishers publish several different genres, or are publishers genre specific mostly?
There are small publishers that are very genre specific. Now they will, some of them will do all genres, by which they mean science fiction, fantasy, and horror. Um, Others are, we'll publish this because we think it's good, but you have to have someone that is receptive to your type of work. So if someone's never published horror before, the chances of me submitting to them are low because I'm not going to, I don't want to be the first person who's ever going to tickle their horror fancy because I don't think I'm going to be that person. I don't. So look for people who have published horror. Look for publishers who have published Bizarro before, people who have published something slightly like what I write, because I don't want to sit there and ask them, "Hey, I would like you to publish this book, which is utterly unlike anything you have ever published before."
Who do you
Because
find those publishers? What's the best way to find them?
um, if you have friends who are also writers, you ask them who has published you. Who have you been satisfied with publishing you? There is also a number of places like Duotrope or Query Tracker who will keep track of open submission periods for novels and short stories, and you can, click and say, what is your genre? Horror. Who's looking for horror? And there's always some, and then you have to start drilling down into how much are they going to pay, and that sort of thing. So it's a process, but there's a number of websites and sort of aids that you can employ to make it much less difficult.
You don't necessarily have to have an agent then.
No, all of my books so far have been unagented. That said, I acquired an agent this summer, so now the ball game has changed a little bit.
Huh. Okay. So, in Little Britches, what character did you like the best or the most when you were writing?
Oh,
Sorry, love or hate the most.
um, Little Britches himself was a bundle of fun because he's not just a 2-year-old kid with guns, he's a foul-mouthed 2-year-old with guns. So he gets to like be mean to people and just say awful things. Um, and people and I enjoyed that. Um, and because he's not a realistic character, it's difficult to sort of hold a lot against him. But the interactions I enjoyed the most were between essentially a straight arrow FBI agent and a corrupt cop who were teamed up together on the investigation. So they had very different perspectives and they had very different ways of approaching what was going on, and they had different motives. Um, and as the story goes on, they start rubbing off on each other. And, part of the fun of the story is, okay, which one of them is going to change more? Is our straight arrow guy gonna bend, or is our bent cop gonna get start on the straight and narrow? Are they going to get caught? And
Okay.
so that was a lot of fun to write because they struck sparks of each other.
Okay. So, what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Well, I have two books that I've got one book that is currently making the rounds with publishers, and I'm following that up with another book. One of them is about a necromancer who solves, or at least investigates, murders, which you'd think would be a very short book. But once you start kind of figuring out what a necromancer can and cannot do, then that adds a lot of complications to this person was murdered. How do you ask them how they were murdered? Um, the other one is a alternate history, um, 1920s aviation pulp novel about a group of people who own a aircraft carrier Zeppelin and do air shows around the country and steal things.
Okay.
So, like I said, I look at things differently from most people, and my ideas tend to be way out there. Uh, but a number of people have told me that they enjoy these books and that the writing is good and and like the characters. So I am hopeful that I will get a publisher for them because I can't wait to share them.
Do you put any humor in your books?
Absolutely. Um, if the concept doesn't make me laugh, um, or if there isn't something funny in there, uh, there's I generally don't do it because it has to strike me a certain way. Otherwise, investing in 12 months in this is not going to make me happy. There has to be an amount of humor in it, even if
Okay.
even if I'm the only person who gets it.
So, what is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
My favorite part is I realized when I lived in California, I went to see Tim Powers do a signing. Tim Powers is a wonderful writer and a wonderful person to talk to. And he was talking about the time he was at a convention and he just talked with all of these other writers that I loved. And I thought to myself, I want to do that. I don't just want to be a writer. I want to go to conventions and talk with other people about my books and about their books and have those conversations where you kind of take about and go, well, why did you do this? Why did you do that? I really like the way you brought this together. Um, and so almost more than the writing process, because I like the writing process. You sit down, you stare at the words, and you go, where should this be going? Where is something nobody has taken this before? What is going to get me to this really, really awesome bit that I have planned for later? So the anticipation is very fun, but also sitting down and talking with writers about craft, about what they've done, why they've done it, and learning about other people's process because writing can be very lonely. So when you sit down and speak with other writers, you go, "Oh, I'm not the only person that thinks that is very odd or that's an unusual aspect of our profession."
Hmm. Absolutely. So, what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process, and how do you overcome that challenge?
Um, the most challenging part for me has been finding publishers, and I have addressed that by finding myself an agent. Uh, and that has lightened my load considerably because I don't have to sit down once a week and go, okay, here's my list of agents, here's my list of publishers I want to talk to. How do I write an introduction letter specifically for them? I have a boilerplate, and but I have to tailor it towards them, and that's work, and and it gets me stressed because I don't like to um, sit there and obsess about are they gonna is this the right word to use with this agent? Am I saying things right? Did I, like I have done dozens of times, misspell something? Did I misspell the agent's name? Because that's generally one that'll get you rejected.
So, what does the agent do that helps you?
The agent, first of all, the agent looks at the manuscript and says, okay, this needs to be adjusted, that needs to be adjusted. Would you consider doing this? They've had their proofreaders go through it. They pick out all of the mighty surviving typos, and they say, consider doing this, consider doing that. But more than that, they know publishers and they know editors at those publishers and they know what they like. So when they take on a book, they usually have a good idea, in my limited experience, they have a good idea of who's going to react well to this sort of book, which is absolutely a skill and a knowledge base I do not have. I don't know what particular editors like, and I don't know um, how to approach them.
Hmm. Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
My favorite adventure continues to be a convention called NECCON, which happens every year in the summer. Um, and it is a small gathering. And when I say small, it's about 200 people. It is mostly a professionals con, but it's also a fan con. And they are incredibly supportive and very kind and generous. And they have been I've been going for close to 20 years, and I have scored several publishing opportunities at that convention because people sat down, looked at my work, and said, we like this. That's how I got my first publishing contract with Thunderstorm Books. Um, Someone read one of my short stories and said, do you have a novel? And I said, yes, I do. And they said, well, we'd like to publish it. And so that novel got published in a limited edition hardcover that was beautiful. It's amazing. It was an incredible way to start a novel career.
Wow. You're not the only person that said Nikon has been fantastic. Yeah.
It really is very different from other conventions, and um, it's the reason that New England horror is different from other scenes. NECCON started out as a horror convention, has broadened out, but the supportiveness and the sense that we're all in this together really sets it apart from other genres and other locations that are less supportive and feel like they have to compete with each other. And I don't think authors really have to compete with each other.
Mm-hmm. So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Um, the greatest lesson I have learned is go nuts.
Okay.
I was absolutely stuck on a book, and like I was writing it and I was bored and I didn't know what was coming next. So I took 2 days off and said, what is the most absolutely hilariously, insanely funny thing I could do next? And it took me a little while and it just and I landed on it and it and that idea pulled the rest of the novel together and it just became this tentpole section in chapter 5 where this thing happens and all throughout the rest of the book people talk, the characters talk about what happened, and it's also a very romantic moment where the necromancer takes his dead girlfriend out to a ball. And how does he have to make that work? And what happens there? And how does he make that happen? And how do other people who find out react to that? And the answer is poorly. But
Okay.
it's
Now,
also sweet, romantic.
for those people who are not really horror people, what is a necromancer?
A necromancer is someone whose magic deals with the dead. And necromancy broadly is anything like reanimation of corpses or speaking with spirits uh or things like that. So when you have someone talking with skulls or channeling the spirits of the dead, that is technically necromancy.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So, um, what piece of advice would you want to give to other writers?
Um, I'm not yet in the position, I don't think, to be offering valuable advice to other people, to other writers, because I am, you not not very much well known. But my advice is always going to be is it has been do the work, read read more than you write. Make sure you keep reading. Read good things, read bad things, read outside of your genre. Read because it feeds the machine and it all will come into your writing machine.
Okay.
So it's a bunch of scattered advice.
It's good. No, it's good advice. Read. That's definitely important. Okay. So now I have questions about you as a person. What is
Okay.
one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Um, there's not a lot that people don't realize about me. I mean, I lived in New England. I moved to New Mexico. I moved to California, and then I moved back to New England. I am a New Englander both by choice, by birth and by choice. Um, so that's the thing many people don't know. Like, lots of people think I've always lived in Vermont. Like, no, that's just where I live now.
Okay. And were you brought up in Vermont,
I was brought up in Connecticut.
Connecticut? Okay. But it's New England, so
Yeah, Connecticut is the least New England state you can get, but it is
okay.
still technically New England.
Yes, it is. Okay. Are there any groups, clubs, or organizations aside from NECCON, of course, that you could recommend to other writers that might have helped you in your career?
Not specifically, but I will say that my writing group has been immensely helpful. So if you can find a good writing group and You got to test a couple to make sure you've got one that works for you. Because writing groups can be poisonous and toxic like every other group. So find your if I do recommend finding a writers group and finding one that works for you. And if that means building your own, do that.
Okay. So, what is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
If you haven't met me and if you haven't been in my car, you will not realize that I am a longtime punk. And that, as far as I'm concerned, the epitome of music is a person screaming into a microphone over very, very aggressive guitars.
No, I already asked you that question, but I wanted to see if you had another answer.
Yeah, that's fine. I can come
Okay.
up with stuff that people don't know about me.
So what question do you wish interviewers would ask you, and what would your answer be?
Um, I haven't had a lot of interviews. Um, the one I wish people would ask is, what is aviation pulp? And I'll try to keep this to 2 minutes. Aviation pulp is a genre that existed essentially in the mid 20s through the 30s and sort of died with pulp. Died with the pulp magazines during World War II. Aviation pulp was concentrated on marvelous men and their flying machines. Instead of, having the fedora and the gun, aviation pulp heroes would have an airplane and they would fly around. And many of these stories took place in World War One. And as the genre expanded, they started to get very science fiction-y, very fantasy-y, coming up against ghosts and mummies and vampires who also flew airplanes. And I think that is a genre that is ripe to return, because I think flying is one of the most wonderful experiences you can have, especially if you can do it in an open cockpit airplane.
Hmm. I gather you've done that.
There's a place called the Old Rhinebeck Aerodrome where they will take you up in a nearly 100-year-old biplane called a Standard 29 that was built in 1929. And it is so very different from flying in a jet because it is slower, the wind is in your hair, and everything is in a recognizable size. You're not 20,000 feet up in the air and looking through this tube down to things you can't recognize. You can recognize trees, cars, people, and you're flying above them, and it is an incredibly different experience.
Wow. So is that one of your passions?
Absolutely is, yes. I
Yeah.
have an entire shelf over there that I can't put on the camera of aviation pulp.
Wow. So what are your other passions? And when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love?
Um, My one of my other passions is I run a weekly Call of Cthulhu game with some people I have known for years, and that is wonderful because once a week I have something fixed on my schedule where I'm going to see people, sit down, laugh with them, have a good time for 3 hours. And I think that kind of keeps me on an even keel because a lot of people before this, I didn't have a lot of contact with people because writing is writing's very lonely. You do it all by yourself. And I don't get out and socialize much. I don't go to bars. I don't go to church. So having a weekly game gets me the opportunity to be a social person. I have also written for the Call of Cthulhu game. I am on the cover of the Beyond the Mountains of Madness supplement, which is an award winner, and I'm very proud of that. So that's one of the things I have enjoyed. One of my passions is indeed Call of Cthulhu.
Okay. So what does your writing space look like? And what do you need to have with you when you're writing or editing?
Well, you're looking at my writing space. I have a desktop and I have a shelf full of books so I can turn around and refer to them when I need them. But I also work at work. I have a job where I drive people in wheelchairs here and there. And because the spaces between the appointments are fairly large, it's not worth it to try and pick up someone else. So when I drop someone off, they have their appointment, and I will sit in my van, open up my laptop, and start writing.
Hmm.
So it also looks like the inside of a van.
Okay. So what else do you need to have with you when you're writing or editing? Like for example, food or drink.
Music. I have a lot of movie soundtracks. Pacific Rim and Mad Max, Fury Road are two excellent soundtracks that get me ginned up to get my writing and to get it out.
Okay. And um, do, I'm not familiar with those, but are they without lyrics?
Yeah, they are without lyrics and they're specifically there to set a mood for a scene,
Hmm.
and those can be very intense. The Fury Road soundtrack is like driving down the desert at 120 miles an hour with the wind blowing through your hair. It's that kind of music, and it really gets me going and gets the juices flowing. And
Okay. So, writers very often have have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them with their work. And do you have any? And what do you have? And do they help or hinder you?
I have two cats. One of them is a tortoiseshell named Charlotta. She was a rescue. We found her, and she was a skinny thing, and now she is a little larger, and I'm perfectly okay with that. My other is Shiro, who is a delightful gray cat who is snuggly as anything. And both of them are generally helpful. However, my desktop has a off button that is on the top surface, and Charlotta's feet fit perfectly in that. So, and she likes to sit on the on in the winter months. She likes to sit on the top of the computer, where the exit vent is to get rid of all the heat in the computer, and it warms her tummy. So she has motivation to get up on the computer, and she has more than once caused me to say some very ungentlemanly words, because she has shut down my computer in the middle of me writing.
Yeah, my cat has actually written things on my when I
Mm.
was
Hmm.
when I was in Word.
Yes.
Okay. So, um, how important has the New England setting been to your writing?
I like the New England setting better than other settings. It has, to my mind, more moods. The high desert tends to have two moods, and that is blistering sun and a cold night. And you get that 3/4 of the year. California, Northern California certainly, has seasons, but they don't vary nearly as much as New England does. You won't get snow on the mountains. You won't get the explosion of color that is autumn in New England. New England is a very expressive location, and we moved back partially because we love that.
Hmm. Okay. I just have two more questions for you. One is, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And you can you can get John's work at Annie's if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people get your work?
Um, you can obviously order my work at your at Annie's bookshop because that's important. But because Crossroad Press tends to uses the KDP, you can find me on Amazon. Um, you can, because they're on Ingram, you can order them through your favorite bookshop, which if it isn't Ann's, probably ought to be.
Okay, thank you. And my last question is, how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Um, when I'm on social media, I'm on Blue Sky and I am on Facebook. I have taken the moniker Death Ginger. So if you go to your local, if you go to Facebook, you're gonna go to Blue Sky, and you just look me up as Death Ginger, you will find me. You can also find my Patreon, which is, wait for it, Death Ginger. Um, and on my Patreon, I share a weekly either an essay about what I'm reading and writing or tidbits from what I'm currently working on.
Hey, that's wonderful. Well, thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a pleasure talking with you.
Hey, and hope maybe we'll see you at the store someday.
You certainly will. I've
Thanks.
made a promise to myself.
Okay, John Goodrich. Thank you.